Other than the partisan makeup of the House, what was the greatest institutional obstacle to change when you took over as Speaker? And what do you see as the greatest institutional obstacle to making change today?
Oh, I think the biggest obstacle is that the committee structure has people focused so narrowly on their own interests that they find it very hard to think about the larger interest. And that was particularly true of the Appropriations Committee, which is a world all of its own and which basically ignores the rest of the House most of the time.
Okay. Do you think the contract with America would have the same effect on Congress today as it did during your reign as Speaker of the House?
Well, no. I think you first have to have a vacuum. We'd been in the wilderness for 40 years. The Democrats had alienated the country in 93, 94. And so people were ready for a sudden dramatic change. And we were standing on Ronald Reagan's shoulders. And virtually every item in the contract actually came from Ronald Reagan and his platform. So I think you'd have to have that kind of a buildup to have the same impact. But we also got 9 million additional votes, the largest increase for one party in American history in an off year. And I think when you have that kind of tidal wave, you can get a lot of things done.
You have criticized the partisanship nature of Washington, but your time as Speaker of the House was known for extreme division among the parties. What do you believe are the main differences between both times?
Well, when I was Speaker, clearly the Democrats were very upset because they've been in power for 40 years, and they deeply resented the fact that we had won control. They thought we had somehow cheated because otherwise how could they be out of power? But the fact is, when we passed welfare reform, for example, we exactly split the Democratic Party. 101 Democrats voted with us, 101 Democrats voted against us. When we balanced the federal budget, we had a substantial majority of Democrats vote with us. So I think we did a lot more to try to reach out than people have done in the last 8 years, and I think it's been a mistake. I think people have to stand on principle, and when you have to be partisan, you should be. But as often as possible, you should find ways to work with the other side, as we do, for example, at the Center for Health Transformation, where we've worked with Senator Clinton, we've worked with Congressman Patrick Kennedy, we've worked with Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island, we've worked with Senator John Kerry on e-prescribing. You ought to be able to find some things you can work on together for the good of the country.
Seeing as how the Republican majority you created has now shifted back to being the minority, how would you have changed your strategy to build not only a majority in the Republican Party, but infuse it with the leadership necessary to maintain the position?
Well, I think that was clearly a failure. We needed to have a much deeper training program in 93, 94, 95, and 96 so that a second and third generation of Republicans understood what we were doing. I think Reagan and I represented, along with Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain, an intellectual conservatism that was clear, principled, understood what it was doing, and was able to explain it. And we were replaced by people who frankly didn't understand the principles and didn't know how to explain them. And it's been a terrible, terrible loss for the country, and a great loss to me personally to see what had been a 16-year effort thrown away like this. But I think we have to go back and start over and try to train a generation, not just of Republicans, but a generation of independents, of Democrats, and of Republicans who recognize that if we're going to compete with China and India, we have to have very dramatic, real change.
A primary focus of the contract with America was fiscal responsibility. During President Bush's first term, the deficit soared from $18 billion to $596 billion. Why did the contract with America's fiscal responsibility not carry over into Bush's presidency?
I think both President Bush and the Republican Congress misunderstood the Constitution. The Constitution is designed to require tension between the legislative and executive branches. The President should have vetoed bad bills. The Congress should have investigated bad bureaucracy. The Republicans in Congress didn't want to investigate bad bureaucracy because it was a Republican president, and the president didn't want to veto bad bills because it was a Republican Congress. The result was we wasted hundreds of billions of dollars. We sickened the government, and it was a huge and profound mistake, and the Republicans have paid for it in the election of 2006 and are in substantial trouble right now because the country really does not want to see huge deficits and bloated bureaucracy.
Okay. In 2006, the Republicans lost the majority in Congress with overspending and the war in Iraq. How can the Republicans regain the American public's confidence?
Well, I'd encourage every Republican and every Democrat to go to AmericanSolutions.com and read the platform of the American people. Every single issue in that platform has a majority of Republicans, a majority of Democrats, and a majority of independents. We call it a tripartisan platform. Go back to the basics. Represent the American people, stand up for their values, take on Washington, insist on fighting corruption and fraud and theft of money, and I think you could pretty rapidly rebuild a majority.
All right, last question. Is it irresponsible of candidates to harp on the evils of lobbying, realizing the issue of money in politics is the much larger elephant in the room? How does and how should influence be manifested in the legislative process? And where do you see the role of money in politics in 20 years?
Well, first of all, if you have a government which this year is going to spend $4.4 trillion, you're going to have a lot of lobbying, because that's an immense amount of power, an immense amount of money, and people are going to be attracted to it. So if you really want less lobbying, you need to have smaller government. Second, we'd have a much healthier system if we allowed individual Americans to give whatever they want to in after-tax personal income, as long as it was reported every night on the internet in a clear way that was accountable. The current system is sick. It is going to get sicker. The McCain-Feingold bill was wrong. It's unconstitutional in my judgment. It limits free speech, and the result has been there's actually more money washing around in bad ways doing negative things, because all of this campaign finance reform has simply distorted the system and blocked candidates from getting the money they should have and driven that money into perverse and negative goals.
Great.
Thank you.